You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't walk down this aisle and marry the man who murdered my mother. That was the thought screaming inside my head, a raw, terrifying broadcast over the sound of Pachelbel's cannon playing in the cathedral. It was the absolute, devastating truth. The silk of my wedding dress felt like a straitjacket. The scent of 1,000 white roses made me feel sick, not romantic. I know, that is a hell of a way to start a story, but there is really no other way to explain what was happening to me right now. They say what goes around comes around. They say justice always finds a way, no matter how long the road is. I'd spent my entire adult life believing in the concept of a shared future, of trust, of building something honest with someone. I'd believed that if you gave your whole heart to a man, he would guard it. That belief was a fantasy, and the truth had just walked up and punched me in the face. Betrayal. It is not just about cheating. It is about a person looking you in the eye and letting you believe a lie that could destroy your entire life. How are you doing right now? I hope you're having a good day. It's a bit overcast where I am, but I hope wherever you are watching from, the weather is treating you kindly. Because the story I'm about to tell you is a wild ride. Once I start, you will not be able to stop listening. I promise you that. You are going to be hooked. My name is Cora Nance. This is the story of how I went from being a naive, heartbroken girl planning her perfect wedding to becoming the woman who nearly walked into a trap, only to be saved by the most unlikely person on earth, a man who looked like he had stepped directly out of a nightmare, a man whose face was hard and whose life was violence. This is the story of my wedding day, the beautiful white dress, the nervous groom, and the whispered words, "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad." I need you to hit the like button right now and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss the ending of this. It's a powerful message about how kindness and family are not always about blood. But let me start from the beginning. I was 24, an only child. My father, Robert Nance, had died when I was in college, a sudden, tragic heart attack. My mother, Elara Nance, never really recovered. She passed away 3 years later in what was ruled a drowning accident at our family's lake house. It was devastating. When I met Julian Thorne, he felt like a lifeline. He was 32, a successful commercial developer, handsome, and he was patient. He understood grief, or so I thought. He was the kind of man you brought home to your grandmother. Clean-cut, polite, and driven. He swept me off my feet over 2 years, and 9 months ago, he proposed on the same beach where my parents had their first date. It felt like destiny. It felt like the universe was finally giving me back the safety and love I had lost. I believed in storybook love. I believed in soulmates. I believed that my heart, which was already patched together after losing both parents, was safe with Julian. I poured every bit of my hope, my inheritance, and my identity into this future with him. I was trusting and maybe too forgiving, a classic only child flaw. If someone showed me kindness, I usually defaulted to believing they were good. That was my foundation. I was a person who needed to believe in the goodness of people, and Julian Thorne was the perfect canvas for that need. Julian had been instrumental in helping me manage my parents' estate. He had been so patient when I was too devastated to look at the paperwork for the lake house, which was the most valuable asset. The lake house was tied up in my mother's estate, and he had reassured me he'd handle the sale when the time was right, after the wedding. That was the first crucial clue, the one that was hidden in plain sight. Julian was always the one handling the property paperwork. I just saw it as him being supportive, taking the burden off his grieving fiancée. The wedding day itself was set for today, 3 years and 1 day after my mother's death. Julian had suggested the date, saying it was a way to honor her memory by turning a day of sadness into a day of joy. I thought it was sweet. The audience knows something I did not. The timing was not a coincidence at all. It was a deadline. A ticking clock. We were having the ceremony at the historic St. Jude's Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Grand Regency Hotel. Everything was paid for, mostly by the money Julian had invested for me from the small amount of my father's life insurance. I was wearing my mother's vintage lace veil, and my dress was a custom A-line silk gown. I was standing in the side antechamber of the cathedral, the organ music swelling. My maid of honor, Lexi Connors, was fussing with my veil, trying to settle my nerves. "Just breathe, Cora. You look stunning." "Julian is going to lose his mind," Lexi whispered, adjusting my pearl necklace. I forced a smile, but my stomach was a knot. It wasn't just wedding jitters. I had this profound, cold dread. I kept telling myself it was grief finally hitting, because this was the first huge life moment without my parents. Then, the door to the small antechamber opened. It wasn't Lexi's husband coming to check on us. It wasn't the wedding coordinator. A man walked in, a mountain of a man, dressed in a faded leather cut with patches, chains, and a beard that looked carved from granite. He was massive, his eyes shielded by dark sunglasses, despite the dim interior. He looked completely out of place, like a misplaced prop from a crime movie. He paused just inside the door, his eyes scanning the room. Lexi gasped, covering her mouth. I just stared. He was an intimidating figure, and a single heavy silver patch on his leather vest said simply, Angel. He ignored Lexi, walking directly toward me. His presence filled the small room, blocking the light. He leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the sound of the organ music. Cora, he said, and the way he said my name was startlingly gentle. He paused, making sure I was listening. He smelled faintly of gasoline and pipe tobacco. Then he delivered the words that completely recontextualized my entire life, everything I believed, everything I had planned for the future, and everyone I had ever trusted. You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad. The shock was a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, and I felt Lexi's frantic grip on my arm. Lexi had always been quick to panic. Me. I was frozen in pure disbelief. An enormous, scary man who looked like he belonged on a motorcycle rally was telling me I was in danger, and to pretend he was my dead father, all while the organ music signaled my imminent walk down the aisle. Who are you? I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. He didn't remove his sunglasses, but I felt the weight of his gaze. His jaw was set hard. My name is Stone Daltrey, he rumbled, never taking his eyes off me. He glanced briefly towards the door leading to the sanctuary where Julian was waiting. I was a friend of Robert Nance. A very old friend. You don't have time for the details. He asked me years ago, if he ever disappeared, to watch out for you. He gave me specific instructions for this day, for this place. Lexi was tugging on my hand, whispering, Cora, we need to call security. He's one of those people. Stone Daltrey ignored her. He pulled a folded, slightly worn piece of paper from an inner pocket of his vest. It wasn't formal stationery. It was a note scrawled on the back of a mechanic's invoice. Your father wrote this 3 years ago. If you read this, you have 30 seconds to decide if you trust me or if you trust the man waiting for you at that altar. The handwriting was messy, distinctive, and completely unmistakable. It was my father's. I snatched the note. It was brief. Cora, if Stone gives you this, he is the last person you can trust. If Julian is still in the picture, he is a liar. He is not who he says he is. I went to the lake house on the 3rd anniversary. I found something. It wasn't an accident, honey. Be strong. For me. For Mom. Dad. I read it twice. The world tilted. The beautiful cathedral, the white dress, the swelling music, it was all a gorgeous, suffocating lie. Julian Thorne, the man I was about to marry, was involved in my mother's death. The note didn't say he killed her. It said, it wasn't an accident, and Julian is a liar. It was enough. I looked at Stone, really looked at him. His face was weathered, scarred, but there was a fierce protective intensity in his dark eyes. He was enormous, but he was standing slightly between me and the sanctuary door, like a shield. What do I do? The question was small, helpless. The naive girl was gone. You walk out there. You marry him, Stone said, his voice flat. But not before I walk you down the aisle. Lexi made a horrified sound. What? You can't be serious, Cora. He's a total stranger, a criminal backslash. You need a replacement father figure, Cora, Stone stated, his logic brutally simple. Julian is going to be watching the entry. If your father's old associate, a man who knows all the dark corners of the Nance family business, walks you out, it changes the dynamic immediately. It tells Julian you have a protector. It gives us time. My father, Robert Nance, wasn't a corporate lawyer, despite what Julian and I told people. He was a fixer. A quiet, powerful man who dealt in gray areas. He had owned a series of legitimate construction companies, but his real work was untangling complicated, usually criminal, situations for very wealthy people. He knew people like Stone. The angel on Stone's vest wasn't a fashion statement, it meant something heavy. I thought back over the last 2 years with Julian. I had been so trusting, so blind. Julian and I met when I was volunteering at a charity gala my mother had started. Julian had swooped in, offering not just emotional support, but professional advice regarding my parents' complicated finances. He told me he had an investment fund based out of Port City Securities. He showed me documents, quarterly reports, and a projection that promised high, steady returns, enough to cover the wedding and leave me financially comfortable. He was the picture of stability. But I remember one night, about 6 months into our relationship. We were at the lake house, and Julian had been stressed about a business deal. He drank too much wine and started talking about his past. He said he hadn't always been Julian Thorne. I used to be called something else, he'd slurred, staring into the fireplace. A name associated with trouble. I had to create a new identity. A clean slate. Everything you see, the suits, the car, the job, it's all me. But the name is a necessary mask. I had laughed it off. I told him everyone reinvented themselves. I told him I loved him, not his name. I told him he was safe with me. That vulnerability window, that moment I dropped my guard completely, was what he used. And my own flaw, my need to trust, my eagerness for a stable family, cemented the lie. I wanted Julian to be good. I needed him to be my safe harbor. I had introduced Julian to some of my mother's distant relatives, but mostly, I'd relied on him. He had handled the sale of my father's smaller properties, assuring me the money was safely invested. Layering the dramatic irony, the audience now knows the investment reports were likely fake, and Julian was systematically liquidating my inheritance, using my trust to do it. What did my mother discover at the lake house? That question clawed at me. She was a meticulous woman. She kept perfect records of everything, especially the legal papers related to my father's legitimate business, Nance Construction. One time, Julian and I were looking for old photo albums in the dusty office at the lake house. My mother's desk was exactly as she left it. Julian, always helpful, had gone through the drawers, claiming he was organizing. He'd pulled out a thick legal file, stamped property conveyance. "Wow, your mom was organized," he had commented, flipping through the papers quickly, then stuffing the file back in. "Old deeds, boring stuff. Don't worry, I have a copy of all the current legal documents." I had barely glanced at it, distracted by finding a picture of my father teaching me to ride a bike. That was the crucial clue I missed. Julian didn't want me to see what was in that file. "The processional music is about to end, Cora," Lexi hissed, wide-eyed, watching the door. "We have to go. Do not do this. Do not take his arm." I looked at Stone. He wasn't asking. He was commanding. His eyes held the kind of experience that came from true danger, not just stressful deadlines. "My father's letter," I murmured, clutching the crumpled paper. "What did he find?" "The lake house. Your mother's death," Stone said, his voice flat. "It wasn't an accident. She had documentation. Something that linked Julian to your father's old, illegal business dealings. The kind that put people in the ground. She was going to expose him before this wedding. The devastating hook had worked. Julian wasn't just a cheat. He was dangerous. The organ music stopped. Silence settled over the cathedral. It was the signal. Stone offered his massive, calloused arm. He was wearing an ordinary black suit jacket over his vest now, trying to mask the patches, but the sheer size of him was alarming. "We walk now, Cora. Trust me. This is the only way to get you out of this without a scene that ends in a lot more than just a broken wedding." My choice was terrifyingly clear. I could scream, run, and expose Julian right now, possibly endangering Lexi and myself with a desperate cornersman. Or I could play along, use Stone as a sudden, unexpected complication Julian would have to deal with, and buy myself time to find the evidence my mother died trying to protect. I inhaled the stale, musty air of the antechamber. I looked down at the hand on Stone's arm. It was massive, scarred, and surprisingly steady. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "But we don't just walk out there. I need you to do something first." Stone leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Name it." "I need you to look at Julian, not with protection, but with hostility. Like I'm your property, and he is a mistake I'm making. Like you're warning him." A rare, fleeting ghost of a smile touched Stone's lips, then vanished. "I can do that, sweetheart." "That's easy." Lexi watched in horror as I let go of her arm and placed my hand on Stone Daltrey's. The organ music began again, the cue for the bridal processional. We walked toward the door. The suspense was unbearable. I was walking toward the man who had loved me, comforted me, and was now revealed as my mother's possible murderer, and my escort was a Hell's Angel associate who was now my temporary, highly dangerous pseudo-father. When the massive oak doors swung open, the light hit us, and I saw Julian at the altar. He was pristine in his tuxedo, smiling. The moment his eyes landed on Stone Daltrey, the perfect smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. Confusion warred with a flash of pure, cold rage. The surprise was genuine. He had not expected this. My first betrayal, the betrayal of my entire life, was in his faltering eyes. The game had changed, and Julian Thorne knew it instantly. I was no longer an easy target. I was protected. The walk down the aisle felt like a descent into something irreversible. Every step was a commitment to the lie Stone had forced me into. The catastrophe wasn't marrying Julian. The catastrophe was the sudden, shocking realization that I had to marry him to survive. If I caused a scene now, if I accused him, Stone Daltrey's note implied I would be silencing myself forever, just like my mother. I was walking into the lion's den, but now I had a grizzly bear walking me in. Julian was rigid at the altar. I could feel the tension radiating off him across the marble floor. His smile was gone, replaced by a mask of polite confusion that didn't quite cover the fury in his eyes. He scanned the congregation, looking for an explanation for the giant, intimidating man in a leather-trimmed suit jacket gripping my arm like a vice. As we reached the front, Stone stopped. He didn't offer my hand to Julian immediately. Instead, he leaned down toward Julian, effectively blocking the view of the priest and the first few pews. "Thorne," Stone's voice was low, a sandpaper rasp that only Julian and I could hear. "I'm Stone Daltrey. Robert Nance and I go way back. Way back. We're talking 25 years of shared history. Cora is family, and I am her father's choice, his executor, and his protector." Julian's composure was incredible. He recovered instantly, pasting on a genial, slightly bewildered expression. "Mr. Daltrey," Julian said, offering a hand that Stone ignored completely. "I wasn't aware Cora had a second cousin." "Welcome. A surprise, but a welcome one." "Not a cousin," Stone corrected, his tone chillingly precise. "Her father trusted me with things he wouldn't tell his own shadow. I'm here to ensure everything that belonged to Robert stays with Robert's child. You understand? Everything." He delivered the last word like a silent threat. This was the irrevocable commitment. I was no longer just Julian's naive bride. I was now the daughter of a powerful, dangerous, deceased man, and her interests were being guarded by a man Julian clearly recognized as a serious threat. I was forcing Julian into a marriage where he couldn't simply absorb me and my assets without facing immediate, powerful scrutiny. Stone finally released my arm and turned to the priest. Julian's hand, when he took mine, was cold. He smiled for the cameras, but his grip was painfully tight. The ceremony began. It was a blur of platitudes, promises, and the deafening silence of the lie. As the priest droned on about eternal commitment, I was thinking about the old illegal business dealings my father and Julian might have shared. Julian Thorne was a successful developer. His motivation was simple: money and legitimacy. The Nance family had both. My father had laundered his illicit earnings through his legitimate construction company and real estate holdings. He died suddenly, leaving everything to my mother, then to me. The most valuable, and perhaps most legally complicated, asset was the lake house, which was tied up in my mother's estate. Julian must have seen me, grieving, wealthy, and alone, as the perfect target. He could marry me, get control of the Nance estate, clean up any lingering gray area deals my father left, and look like the grieving, heroic husband who handled everything. The evidence I should have seen but missed? Julian was always pushing for a quick, private sale of the smaller assets, saying we needed to consolidate the cash into liquid investments. He claimed to have helped my mother transfer the deed for the lake house into an easily managed trust before she died. I had trusted him implicitly. The moment the priest asked, "Do you, Cora Nance, take this man?" I nearly choked. My voice was a terrified squeak.
I managed.
My personal stakes were now everything. I had just married a man who might be responsible for my mother's drowning. But now, my safety was linked to Stone Daltrey's presence. During the exchange of rings, Julian's eyes met mine. His expression was impossible to read. Was it relief that I had actually said, "I do"? Was it annoyance that Stone Daltrey was still looming in the front row, looking like a gargoyle in a suit? After the ceremony, during the required photos, Stone managed to get close to me while Julian was momentarily distracted by his business associates. "The reception is where we get clarity," Stone murmured, adjusting the lapel of his ill-fitting suit. "Julian will try to isolate you. He needs to know who I am and why I'm here. He'll want to move the clock back to zero." "Why marry him, Stone? Why didn't you just stop it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because if you broke it off now, he'd know you know, and he would cut you out completely. He's already drained your inheritance into his investments, hasn't he?" I nodded, the truth stinging like a whip. "Exactly. You are penniless, Cora. If you leave, he takes everything and vanishes. If you stay, you are legally his wife. Spouses have rights. More importantly, he needs to finalize the property deeds, especially the lake house, to get full control of the Nance Construction Shell Corporation assets. He needs you alive, and he needs you married to him, until he signs the final papers tomorrow morning. That's the alliance that formed under pressure. I overheard him on the phone a week ago. He rushed this wedding because the final legal transfer is tomorrow. The lake house was the key. It wasn't just a sentimental property. It was the nexus of the entire Nance empire, the money, and the power. And Julian needed me to complete the legal process. "We are going to the reception," Stone continued. "You stick to me. I need access to the hotel's business center, or a quiet office. I have a phone number your father gave me. I need to make one call. It will bring in real support, but it will take a few hours." This meant that for the entire duration of my wedding reception, I would be walking a knife's edge, playing the role of the devoted bride to a potential murderer, while relying on a convicted criminal to be my protector. Julian returned, his arms circling my waist, possessive and cold. He shot Stone a look that was pure venom, but he maintained his public smile. "Mr. Daltrey, I hope you'll join us at the Regency." "I'd love to hear more about your history with the Nance family," Julian said, his voice slick with veiled menace. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world, son," Stone replied, using the dismissive term that instantly chipped away at Julian's carefully constructed facade. As we walked out of the cathedral and into the waiting limousine, I felt a deep surge of determination. The despair was still there, but it was hardened by the knowledge that I was fighting for my mother's justice and my own survival. I had given Julian Thorne everything, my trust, my future, and my inheritance. Now he was committed to me, legally and publicly, just hours before he planned to execute the final steps of his betrayal. The moral confusion was immense. I loved the man he pretended to be. I was marrying the monster he was. Now, I was determined to use the brief window of time Stone had given me to turn this wedding into Julian's undoing. The reception hall at the Grand Regency was a gilded cage. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and 400 people applauding the entrance of the happy couple. Julian kept his arm around me, smiling for every photo, but the energy humming between us was not love. It was pure, tightly controlled hostility. Stone Daltrey, the unexpected guest of honor, sat at the main table, the family table, a silent, immovable monument to danger. He didn't touch the champagne, barely spoke, and never once looked away from Julian or me. Julian tried to ignore him, focusing on his business associates and the local political figures who made up the bulk of the guest list, but the tension was a physical third party at our table. Julian launched his first offensive during the obligatory toasts. Pressure Thread 1. Isolating the bride. His best man, Victor Vance, stood up, microphone in hand. Victor was Julian's college roommate and now his partner in the development firm, Thorne and Vance. Victor had always been overly solicitous toward me, a little too charming. To Julian and Cora / Victor began, raising his glass. Julian, you finally found the missing piece. Cora, you are the most trusting, generous soul I have ever met. Julian is lucky to have you. We're all lucky to have your generosity. The word generosity hung in the air. It felt loaded. It was a veiled reference to the funds I had provided for the latest development project, a huge coastal land purchase Julian claimed would make us millions. It was my mother's money. Julian immediately took the microphone from Victor. And to my new father-in-law, Stone Daltrey, Julian said, his smile tight, directing the spotlight away from Victor's comment and onto Stone. A big, unexpected surprise / Stone, I feel like we have a lot to talk about. Maybe we could step into the office after the first dance? I'd love to know how you and Robert became so close that he asked you to walk his daughter down the aisle. Julian was trying to trap Stone, force him into a conversation where he would have to expose the exact nature of his relationship with my father, thereby revealing the weakness in Stone's position. He was not my father, and any authority he had was unofficial. Stone simply raised his champagne flute, still full, in a silent, dismissive gesture. He didn't say a word, and the silence was deafening. Julian was forced to sit down, defeated in the first public exchange. Pressure Thread 2. Stone's urgency. Later, during the chaos of the wedding party photos, Stone managed to pull me aside near the grand staircase, away from the flow of guests. He's nervous. The look he gave Victor when Victor mentioned generosity confirmed it. He's leveraging your money, and he needs those deeds tomorrow morning, Stone whispered, his back to the room, physically shielding me. I haven't been able to make the call. Too many people, too many eyes. I need 10 minutes, Cora. 10 minutes in a room with a lock, and no one near me. The bridal suite, I suggested quickly. It's 2 floors up, private elevator access. I can tell Julian I need to change out of my heels before the dance. That buys us maybe 15 minutes. Perfect. Get Lexi to run interference. Tell her you need her to organize the guests for the bouquet toss, anything to keep her occupied. I looked at Stone. What did my father give you that's so important? A name, a number, a promise. Your father knew someone in the city who could unravel complicated financial crimes fast. He knew something like this was possible, which is why he named me, the guy who looks like a goon, as a failsafe. Julian wouldn't expect that. He'd expect a lawyer or a banker. He'd look for the suit. He didn't expect the street muscle. Deception Layer 1, the trusting bride facade. I had to play the part. I went back into the reception, forcing a smile that felt like glass shards on my face. Julian was drinking heavily, a tell I hadn't noticed before. He was usually meticulous about his public image. "Darling," I said, leaning in and putting my hand on his chest, using every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "My feet are killing me. This dress weighs a ton. Can we sneak upstairs for 15 minutes before the first dance? I want to change into my dancing shoes and powder my nose." Julian's eyes, usually so clear and blue, were slightly clouded by the alcohol and tension. He looked relieved by the suggestion of privacy. "A brilliant idea, Mrs. Thorne," he said, kissing my temple. "A little privacy. A moment to celebrate." He shot a glance toward Stone, who was now engaged in a highly confusing conversation with my elderly Aunt Thelma, who seemed delighted by his terrifying exterior. "Good. The angel is distracted." We took the private elevator up to the bridal suite. The room was huge, opulent, and terrifyingly isolated. Deception Layer 2, Julian's confession/justification. The moment the door closed, the mask dropped entirely. Julian pushed me against the wall, not violently, but with overwhelming force. His breath smelled of expensive scotch. "Who is that man, Cora?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't lie to me." I ran a quick search. No Stone Daltrey associated with Nance Construction, no mention in any will, no relative. "Who is he?" I played the confused, slightly overwhelmed bride. "The vulnerability window. Julian, I swear, I have no idea /" He cornered me right before the walk. He told me he was an old friend of Dad's, a fixer who owed him a debt. He said Dad asked him to watch over me, because I was alone. I was terrified /. "He's huge /." I went along with it because I didn't want a scene at the altar /. I thought he was harmless, just a bit of an eccentric associate. I acted upset, tearing up, selling the performance. Julian stepped back, considering me. The anger in his face lessened, replaced by calculation. He wanted to believe me. It was easier to believe his wife was naive and easily manipulated than to believe she was knowingly setting a trap. "Right," Julian said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "A relic. An old debt. Robert Nance knew some real dirtbags. This complicates things, but it's manageable. He's just a thug, easily bought off or, if necessary, dealt with." He moved toward the minibar, poured another drink, and then he started to talk. This was the success built on my sacrifice, the revelation of the extent of what I'd given up. "Look, Cora, I know you're tired of the money talk, but this is important. We have a huge wire transfer to finalize tomorrow morning, the money from the sale of the waterfront property that we put into the coastal development. It's all ready to go, but I need you to sign the final authorization forms first thing, confirming the funds originated from your accounts before the merger. It's a formality, but essential for the bank." He was talking about the last substantial amount of money I had, money I thought was safely invested. "And the lake house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "It's all set to transfer to the new trust, and then we sell it. We need the cash for the next development phase. We'll buy a beautiful penthouse in the city, Cora. Forget that dusty old place." Julian was pushing for the liquidation of the last physical tie to my parents and the legal proof he needed to consolidate his control. "You've given up so much for me, Cora. Your trust. Your resources," Julian said, approaching me again, his face earnest. "But I'll make it all back for you, 10 times over. I'm building a dynasty for us." He was introducing the other person in the scenario, not another woman, but his true, cold self. Julian Thorne was a man who saw relationships as transactions and marriage as a corporate merger, with him holding the majority shares. Suddenly, I felt a flicker of hope. He still believed I was his trusting asset. He hadn't sealed the deal yet. He needed my signature tomorrow morning. "I need to change now," I insisted, moving toward the closet. "Give me 5 minutes." Julian nodded, distracted, already pulling out his phone. Fine. 5 minutes. Then we go down and dance. And tonight, we celebrate the fact that the Nance estate is finally fully ours. I entered the massive walk-in closet and immediately began scanning for an exit or a connection to Stone. The suite was too large. I found the phone and quickly dialed the front desk. Hello, this is Mrs. Thorne in the bridal suite. My husband is on a very important call, and my uncle, Mr. Daltrey, needs to step away for a confidential business call. Could you please send someone to escort him to a secure, empty office for 10 minutes? He's at the main table. Tell him the call is from the captain. I hung up before the clerk could reply. The captain. It was a risky guess. My father had once used that alias when talking about a powerful associate. It was all I had. I slipped off my heels and walked out, feigning composure. Julian was still arguing quietly on the phone, his back to the door, presumably with Victor Vance. He was building towards the discovery moment, the moment he would realize I wasn't just a trusting fool. All set, darling, I chirped, making sure I sounded happy, giddy even. Julian hung up the phone abruptly, looking irritated. Let's go. Victor's losing his mind over some paperwork complication. Always something. We took the elevator back down. As the doors opened, I scanned the main table. Stone Daltrey was gone. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a new wave of fear. Was Stone successful? Or had Julian's people dealt with him? Julian hadn't seemed to notice his absence yet, too focused on the conversation with Victor. We walked onto the dance floor, and the band struck up our song. Julian pulled me close, his grip possessive, his eyes scanning the room for trouble. The irony was devastating. I was dancing with my executioner. In the middle of the dance, I saw Lexi rushing toward the floor, her eyes wide with panic. She fought her way through the dancers and reached me. Cora, I need to talk to you right now, Lexi whispered urgently, pulling my arm. Julian gripped my waist tighter. Not now, Lexi. We're dancing. It's important, Julian \. It's about the wedding gifts \. Something broke \. Lexi was frantic, obviously lying. I seized the chance. Just a minute, darling. Let me see what she needs. Girls' emergency. Julian reluctantly let me go. Lexi pulled me off the dance floor and toward the coat check. Cora, that man Stone, he was arrested, Lexi said, shaking, her voice barely audible. 2 city cops just pulled him out the side door in handcuffs \. They said they had a warrant for violating probation. I saw the whole thing \. He's gone \. The floor disappeared beneath me. My protector, my one chance, had been removed from the game. Julian had won the immediate battle. Stone was arrested, likely a setup by Julian, using his political connections, precisely because Stone was a thug with a record. I looked back at the dance floor. Julian was watching me, his eyes now narrowed, a smug, satisfied expression creeping onto his face. He knew. He had neutralized the threat. Now, I was completely alone, married to the enemy, and facing a signature that would finalize my destruction tomorrow morning. The dread was mounting, heavy and suffocating. The revelation that Stone Daltrey was gone, arrested during my wedding reception, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The music, the laughter, the glittering lights, it all became a mocking backdrop to my sheer terror. I was utterly exposed. Lexi was still babbling about the broken wedding gift, but I cut her off. Lexi, listen to me, I hissed, gripping her shoulders. Julian did this. He found out who Stone was and called someone. This was planned. I am in serious danger. Lexi looked at me like I had lost my mind. Cora, that is insane \. Julian loves you \. He's handsome, rich, kind \. Why would he? He's involved in my mother's death, Lexi. It wasn't an accident. She found something linking him to Dad's old criminal contacts. Stone was the only one who knew. My voice shook, revealing the devastation inside me. Lexi stared, her denial giving way to horrified recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered. "The way he looked at Stone, the way he pushed you just now in the suite." "I need you to act normal," I instructed, my mind racing. "Go back out there. Tell Julian I'm fixing my makeup. Stall him. I need 5 minutes." I fled through the coat check area and into a staff hallway. My priority was the bridal suite. Stone had tried to make contact with the captain. I needed to see if he succeeded, and if he left any message or evidence. I took the service elevator back up. The hall was silent. The suite door was slightly ajar. Julian must have left it that way, rushing back to the reception once he knew Stone was dealt with. I walked into the suite. It looked exactly as we left it, except for one thing. Julian's tuxedo jacket, which he'd hung carelessly on the back of a chair, was missing. "He's coming back." I went straight to the large, executive desk in the corner. I pulled open the drawers quickly, searching for the key to the suite safe or any evidence Julian might have brought up. Nothing. Then I saw it. On the side table, next to the half-empty bottle of scotch, was Julian's phone, resting face up. He must have been so confident, so eager to finish his business downstairs, that he forgot it. I hesitated. Invading his privacy was an awful violation, but the man I thought was my husband was a lie. This was survival. I picked up the phone. It required a fingerprint. I tried my own, access denied. I tried his right index finger, which I knew he used for everything. The phone unlocked. The discovery. I bypassed his generic messages and went straight to his email and recent calls. The most recent thread was labeled Nance transfer final. The sheer corporate banality of the subject line masked the horror inside. I opened the email. It was a chain of correspondence between Julian and Victor Vance, dated this morning, mere hours before the wedding. From Julian Thorne. Heir to Victor Vance. Subject: Nance transfer final. Victor, finalize the papers for the Lake House deed transfer. It must be executed electronically by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Her signature on the fund's authorization is the last piece. Once that money is consolidated with our offshore holdings, and the Lake House is in the Thorne Holding Trust, we are clear. She signed the prenup, and since the accident happened before the marriage, she has no claim on the property as a spouse, only as the sole heir signing over the assets. The transfer must happen before she potentially discovers the discrepancies in the investment accounts. The timing is critical. Thorne. I read the email again, focusing on the word Julian had used, the accident. He had italicized it. The next email, a response from Victor, was even worse. From Victor Vance. Heir to Julian Thorne. Subject: Nance transfer final. Got it. Paperwork locked down. But Julian, the mother was a mess. Are you sure you covered all the tracks on that? She was nosing around the property deeds. She said something to Agent Kane about the original ledger being hidden at the lake house. She called it her insurance policy. Kane says if that ledger surfaces, our entire operation goes up. It would link the old Nance Construction Shell Company directly to the offshore accounts we are using now. Avance. I backed out of the email thread and checked the recent calls. There was a number listed simply as Kane, PD. I immediately called the number. It was answered on the first ring. Kane, a clipped, professional voice answered. "This is Cora Nance," I said, forcing the words out. "I just married Julian Thorne." A pause. Then the voice lowered, becoming colder, recognizing the name. "Yes, Mrs. Thorne. I was just speaking with Mr. Thorne. Congratulations. Did you need something?" The midpoint devastation. "You arrested Stone Daltrey?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We picked up Mr. Daltrey on a warrant related to an outstanding probation violation. Nothing to do with your wedding, ma'am. Just routine procedure." He was my father's friend. He was trying to warn me, I said, desperation creeping in. Ma'am, Mr. Daltrey is a known associate of organized crime, Kane said, dismissive. Julian Thorne is a respected developer. There's no connection here. You sound distressed. Perhaps you should rejoin your husband. I hung up. Kane wasn't a city cop. He was Julian's ally, an accomplice working within the system. Julian hadn't just used his connections to get Stone arrested. He had an asset, Agent Kane, who was actively working to conceal his crimes. The realization of how deep this went, Julian was protected by someone in law enforcement, stripped me of all support. Julian hadn't killed my mother in a fit of rage. He had done it coldly, calculatedly, because she had found the original ledger, the evidence that tied him to my father's dark business and the offshore shell companies. And he had used my love and grief to systematically transfer all the assets, culminating in the signing tomorrow morning. I was completely alone. My protector was in jail. My husband was a killer and a fraudster. My best friend, Lexi, was too naive to trust with the whole truth. And the authorities were compromised. The storytelling perspective had been completely compromised. I wasn't just walking into an unhappy marriage. I was marrying a criminal who was using the wedding as the final stage of an elaborate, lethal asset transfer. I looked around the room, truly devastated. The full extent of the betrayal was clear. Julian was a predator, not a partner. I went to the closet, desperately searching for anything Stone might have left. My fingers ran along the silk lining of the dress bag, then the shelf where the shoes were stored. Nothing. Then I saw it. A glint of metal underneath the heavy curtain. I bent down and saw a key, heavy and old-fashioned. It was tied to a small, frayed piece of leather. The leather strip had 3 letters burned into it. R.N. Robert Nance. My father. Stone must have planted this key when he was searching the room earlier, or perhaps he planted it when Julian and I were walking in. A key to what? I immediately thought of Victor's email, the original ledger, being hidden at the lake house. My mother's death location. The place Julian needed to transfer tomorrow. This key was likely the key to the safe, or the hidden compartment where my mother had stashed the ledger. My heart hammered against my ribs. Julian would be back soon. I had to get out of the suite and away from the reception. I grabbed the key and stuffed it deep into the lining of my bridal corset. I couldn't run out in the silk dress. I needed a disguise. I saw a black velvet bridesmaid dress, a spare Lexi had brought, hanging in the closet. I stripped out of my wedding dress, leaving it crumpled on the floor like discarded hope. I pulled on the black dress. It was simple, unremarkable, and thankfully it had pockets. I slipped my phone, Julian's phone, and the key into the dress. As I was zipping up the black dress, the door to the suite burst open. It wasn't Julian. It was Victor Vance. He saw the crumpled white dress on the floor and the black dress I was wearing. His eyes widened, a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Cora, what are you doing? Julian sent me up to check on you. He said you were taking too long. Victor's face was not handsome now. It was cold and calculating. He knew everything. He was Julian's true partner in crime. The betrayal was complete. Where is Julian? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's waiting for his wife to dance with him, Victor said, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Julian's discarded phone on the side table. He strode toward it, his face paling as he realized what I must have seen. No, 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 Victor muttered, snatching the phone. You didn't see anything, Cora. You don't know anything. He raised the phone, his face contorted with panic and violence. The devastation was total. I was trapped, wearing black at my own wedding, face to face with the man who had helped orchestrate my mother's death and my impending financial ruin. Victor Vance's panic was my only advantage. He had the phone, the evidence of his and Julian's emails, but he was facing me in a black dress, standing over my discarded wedding gown. The confusion was enough to buy me a fraction of a second. He took one step toward me, raising his hand. The move was automatic, practiced, indicating a casual relationship with violence I hadn't imagined in the polished corporate partner. "Don't touch me, Victor," I snapped, pulling back. "Julian needs you downstairs. The transfer is tomorrow morning. You don't want to mess this up." I was playing on his deepest fear, professional failure and Julian's wrath. Victor froze. "You read the email," he stated, his voice flat, realizing the game was over. "You know about the ledger." "I know everything," I lied, keeping my expression severe. "And if you lay one hand on me, Julian will destroy you for jeopardizing the final signatures. He needs the lake house deed, and he needs the funds transferred cleanly. If his bride shows up bruised, or worse, missing, tomorrow morning, the banks will flag the transfer." I threw down the ultimate card, the ticking clock and Julian's dependency on my cooperation, feigned or not. Victor hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the door. He was trapped between protecting the immediate security of the crime and protecting the long-term execution of the plan. "You're coming back downstairs with me," Victor ordered, his hand gripping my arm painfully. "And you will explain to Julian why you are wearing a dress that makes you look like a waitress at a funeral." "Let go of me, Victor." I jerked my arm away and sprinted toward the door, knowing he couldn't afford a shouting match in the private hall outside the presidential suite. He needed to contain me quietly. I ran down the empty hallway, heading for the service stairs, but Victor was faster. He caught me just as I reached the door. He slammed me against the wall, the force knocking the breath out of me. "You're a liability, Cora," Victor growled, his face inches from mine, stripped of all its easy charm. "A greedy little complication. Your mother was smart, but she was sentimental. She paid the price. You don't have to." "The ledger," I gasped, clutching the key inside my dress. "Where is the ledger?" "In the one place she knew Julian couldn't touch without exposing himself /." "But you won't find it, sweetheart. And Julian will still get the lake house." He twisted my arm, forcing me toward the main staircase. He was going to drag me back to the reception. I had to create a scene, something loud enough to draw attention. I stomped down hard on Victor's foot with the heel of my replacement shoes. He yelled in pain and released me. I didn't run. I did the only thing that would create maximum public disaster for Victor. I opened the door to the grand ballroom balcony, which overlooked the entire reception, and screamed, "Julian Thorne is a fraud /." He killed my mother /." The music stopped instantly. 400 heads turned toward the balcony. Julian, who was halfway across the dance floor, froze, turning slowly to face the balcony. His face was pure stone, all composure gone. Victor, realizing the catastrophic damage, wrestled me back through the door, covering my mouth. "You just ruined everything /" he hissed, dragging me back toward the service stairs. Rock bottom, financial and emotional devastation. Victor pushed me down the cold, concrete steps of the service stairwell. I tumbled, hitting my head and scraping my knee. The pain was immense, but the internal pain was worse. I had just publicly accused my husband of murder on my wedding day. I was officially the hysterical, unreliable bride, and I had no evidence to back it up, especially now that Stone was gone. Victor dragged me through the basement, past the kitchens and laundry rooms. His plan was clear: get me out of the hotel quietly, and either contain me or dispose of me before tomorrow morning's transfer. We burst out into the alley behind the hotel, into the harsh, dirty glow of the sodium lights. A sleek, black sedan was waiting, engine running. Julian's driver, Rex, was leaning against the car. Rex was a massive man, silent and always present, a clear sign of Julian's need for constant, low-level physical security. "Get her in," Victor barked, shoving me toward the car. Rex opened the back door. This was it. The absolute loss of security. Loss of everything. "Where are we going?" I managed, scrambling to stay upright. "Somewhere you can calm down, Cora. Somewhere quiet." "Maybe the lake house," Victor said, and the way he said lake house confirmed my worst fear. It was Julian's execution site. I fought, kicking and scratching. Rex grabbed my arms, his grip like steel bands. Victor was busy searching the pockets of my black dress, frantic for the key. "Where is it? Where is the key?" Victor demanded, shaking me. I spat in his face. "Go to hell, Victor." He backhanded me hard across the face. My head snapped back. The physical pain was sharp and blinding. "Search her again, /. She's hiding something, /. Victor yelled at Rex. As Rex pinned me against the car, searching, he fumbled with the back of my dress. He accidentally brushed the zipper down, revealing the deep plunge of the borrowed bridesmaid dress. He paused, annoyed. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I headbutted Rex sharply. He roared in surprise and let go. I bolted, running blindly down the narrow, garbage-strewn alley. Julian had taken everything, my money, my mother, and now my freedom. The sheer isolation was crushing. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. Stone was compromised, Lexi was terrified, and the police were allied with Julian. I ran until I hit the main street, the lights of the city a confusing blur. I hailed a cab, shaking so badly I could barely speak. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, looking at my bruised face, my scraped knees, and the expensive black dress. "The police station," I whispered. Then I realized, Agent Kane. The police station was Julian's territory. Going there would be handing myself over. I looked at my reflection in the side window, mascara streaks, blood on my chin, the face of a true victim. The loss was total. I had lost the moral high ground, my protector, and the small window of time I had. "Change of plans," I told the driver, my voice suddenly firm. "The lake house. Take me to the Nance property on Lake Serenity. And drive fast." I was forcing a choice. Stay hidden and live in shame, waiting for Julian to find me and execute the transfer, or go to the single location where my mother had hidden the evidence, the key to which was now pressed against my skin. I chose to fight back. I was going back to the place of my mother's death. I was going to find the original ledger, the last remaining piece of my family's legacy, the one thing that would expose Julian Thorne. This was the catalyst for transformation. I was no longer the victim. I was the one who was going to rewrite the narrative. As the cab sped away, I checked the key one last time. It was still there. Julian had the advantage of power and position, but I had the key to his entire operation. I looked at Julian's phone, which I still held. One last thing. I opened a map application and searched for the location of the city detention center. I found the number for the main desk. I needed to know if Stone had succeeded in contacting the captain. I quickly dialed the detention center. "City Detention Center, how may I direct your call?" "I need to leave a message for an inmate, Stone Daltrey," I said, disguising my voice. "Go ahead. Tell him the lake house is now priority 1. And tell him," the bride said, "thank you." The guard hung up without comment. I had no idea if the message would get through or if Stone could do anything, but I had played the only move left on the board. The dark descent had ended, and now, fueled by despair and a desperate need for justice, I was driving straight into the heart of the conflict. The drive to Lake Serenity was agonizing. Every turn of the cab's wheels was taking me closer to the scene of the crime, the place where my mother's life had been cut short. It was a 3-hour drive, and I used every minute to transform the crushing despair of the hotel alley into focused, cold rage. I had the key, I had the confirmation from Victor's frantic reaction that the ledger was real, and I had Julian's phone, a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. But Julian had Agent Kane and the entire network of Thorne and Vance. My choice was impossible: confront the truth at the lake house or disappear forever.
Chose confrontation.
I needed to find something else that Julian had missed, something that would flip the script entirely. I pulled out Julian's phone again. It was the only thing I had that still connected me to his world. I started digging deeper into his encrypted messaging apps. Most were password protected, but one was not, a secure folder labeled Project Lighthouse. I opened it. Inside were detailed blueprints, not of the coastal development project he'd been hyping, but of the Lake Serenity property, my family's lake house. These were not renovation plans. They were schematics detailing the structural integrity and hidden features of the house. I scrolled quickly, my fingers flying. My parents had been intensely private people. My father, the fixer, was paranoid. The house had a lot of hidden features. The blueprints showed a detailed diagram of the house's library, my mother's favorite room. It wasn't the layout that caught my attention. It was a small section labeled Sub-Level Access, Safe Room. The safe room was hidden behind a rotating section of the library's antique bookshelves, accessible only by a specific pressure plate and a two-stage key lock. A key lock that looked exactly like the heavy, old-fashioned key I now had tucked into my dress. My father hadn't just used the lake house for vacations. He had used it as his secure operational hub. And my mother had been using it as her place to store the evidence against Julian. Julian and Victor's emails had confirmed it. She had called the ledger her insurance policy. Suddenly, the timeline of my mother's death made terrifying sense. She didn't accidentally drown. She was likely killed after retrieving or placing the ledger in the safe room, realizing Julian's true nature, and attempting to contact help, probably Stone or Agent Kane, before Julian corrupted him. Julian must have thought he found the ledger and neutralized the threat by drowning her, but he was wrong. She must have hidden the ledger moments before her confrontation. I checked the timestamp on the blueprints. They were modified by Julian 2 days after my mother's death. Julian had spent the first few weeks after the accident pretending to grieve with me, while secretly trying to locate the hidden safe room and the ledger he suspected she had. I had walked straight into a new relationship that provided me with a terrifying kind of clarity and focus. All my previous hopes and dreams were lies. My love for Julian was a hollow echo. But now, I had a purpose, justice for my mother and protection of the truth. I scrolled further on Julian's phone. A recent email thread from an offshore law firm. From C. Du Bois, Antilles Law. Heir to Julian Thorne. Subject: Nance Corporation shell status. Mr. Thorne, the holding corporation structure is complete. Once the final Nance construction assets, specifically the Lake Serenity property deed and the associated funds, are transferred tomorrow morning, the shell corporation will be officially dissolved, and the funds will be untraceable. We have successfully mitigated all risk associated with the historical Ironwood transactions documented in the Nance ledger. Ironwood. Another name, another piece of the puzzle. My father was involved in something called Ironwood. Julian and Victor were using the Nance Construction Shell Company to execute a massive, final money laundering scheme, and the lake house was the last physical asset required to complete the transaction and dissolve the shell, making the money untraceable. My mother's ledger documented the Ironwood transactions. The cab pulled up to the gate of the Nance property. The moon was high and cold over Lake Serenity. The house, usually a warm beacon of family memories, looked like a haunted silhouette against the water. "Stay here, please," I told the cab driver, pulling a wad of cash from my pocket. It was the last of the emergency cash I kept tucked away. "If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call the state police, not the city. Tell them that Cora Nance is inside, and she is in danger." I didn't try to hide my identity or the urgency. This was my new support system, a random, honest cab driver. I walked up the long gravel driveway. The porch light was off. The place was deserted, exactly as I expected. Julian wanted no witnesses for what would happen here. The key I possessed did not open the front door. It was too old. I used the hidden key I knew was kept in the ceramic planter by the porch. I let myself in. The house smelled faintly of dust and the cold lake air. I moved straight through the dark, silent living room to the library. I found the antique bookshelf, heavy with my father's forgotten literature. I pressed on the lower right corner, where the blueprint indicated the pressure plate was hidden. Nothing happened. I pressed harder, then tried rotating the books. Still nothing. Julian had clearly found the general location. Had he secured it further? Then I remembered my father. He loved riddles. The pressure plate wasn't physical. I looked at the titles of the books on the shelf: The Count of Monte Cristo, The Great Gatsby, Moby Dick. My father's life philosophy was simple: protection of family, and always have an exit plan. I looked back at the note Stone had given me. Be strong. For me. For Mom. I scanned the titles again. For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Secret Garden, The Old Man and the Sea. Then I saw it. A collection of poetry my mother loved. Chosen Family, by Maya Angelou. I pulled the volume of poetry. It was thick, heavy, and slightly out of place with the rest of the classics. A faint click echoed through the silent room. I pushed on the lower right shelf. It slid inward silently, revealing a narrow, hidden doorway made of reinforced steel, fitted with two large, heavy keyholes. The key in my corset was for this. I inserted the old key. It turned with a satisfying, deep thunk. But it only engaged the top lock. The lower keyhole required a different key. The two-stage lock, I whispered. Julian must have realized this and been waiting for the other key, or for my signature on the deeds, which would render the ledger irrelevant. My hope plummeted. I had the key to half the lock. The determination built in Act 6 was tested to its breaking point. I was so close. Suddenly, I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. The distinct sound of an engine turning off. It was too soon. The cab driver couldn't have called anyone this fast. I quickly pushed the bookshelf back into place, plunging the library back into shadow. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear. The front door opened slowly, silently. A low voice cut through the stillness of the house. Cora, I know you're here. Victor told me everything. You're making this difficult. You're making this dangerous. Come out now, and we can still salvage something. We can still be married. We just need to fix this mistake. It was Julian Thorne. He had followed me. He knew I had the key. He had come to the lake house to end the last complication before tomorrow morning's final transfer. Julian's voice, calm and controlled, echoed through the library, even though he was still in the front foyer. It was the voice of a man who believed he held all the power, offering a false promise of peace. I knew that offer meant quiet compliance followed by my certain disposal. I stayed silent, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the reinforced steel of the hidden safe-room door behind the bookshelf. I was trapped, but Julian didn't know I was halfway into the secret. Cora, don't be foolish, Julian called out, his voice now closer, moving through the house. That thug, Daltrey, he poisoned your mind. He's a convicted felon, Cora. I'm your husband. We built a life. Come out and talk to me. He was selling the lie one last time. I used the silence to gather my bearings, moving quietly to the massive oak desk in the center of the library. I know what you did to Mom, Julian, I whispered, loud enough to pierce the silence, but low enough that he'd have to enter the library to pinpoint the source. The footsteps stopped abruptly. The silence now was absolute, shattered only by the creak of the old house settling. Julian entered the library. He wasn't in his tuxedo anymore. He was wearing dark clothes, looking like a man ready for grim work. He carried a heavy, chrome-plated flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows. "You're hysterical, Cora," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier affection. "Your mother was careless. She was drinking too much after your father died. She slipped on the dock. It was tragic, but it was an accident." "You pushed her," I challenged, moving slightly behind the desk. "She found the original ledger. She knew about Ironwood and the shell company. She was going to expose you before the wedding. The truth bomb." I watched his face closely. The smooth mask cracked, revealing pure, chilling hatred. "You've been digging," he sneered. "That lowlife Daltrey is more trouble than he's worth. He didn't tell you the whole story, did he? Your father was the architect of the Ironwood scheme, a massive offshore laundering operation. I was just the cleaner, the one who stepped in when Robert had his convenient heart attack. He owed a lot of dangerous people, Cora. I was paying off his debts, protecting you. He was trying to flip the narrative, justifying his actions as necessary evil. You didn't protect me, Julian. You married me to steal the final asset, the lake house, and dissolve the company so the money trail went cold. It's business, Cora /. You were never going to use this house /. It's all tied up in old, toxic deals /. I was going to give you a clean slate, a new life, free of Robert's ghosts /. He moved toward the bookshelf, his eyes scanning the titles. He knew the general location of the safe room, thanks to his modified blueprints, but not the specific trigger. You modified the blueprints. You were searching this house 2 days after you killed her, I pressed. She was a complication /. She was going to call the authorities /. She was going to ruin everything I built /. I gave her a choice, Cora. Give me the ledger, or you go for a swim. She chose the dock, Julian growled, his voice rising in volume. The confession was out. The truth was public, to me at least. He was now directly in front of the bookshelf. He was running his hand along the bottom edge, searching for the physical pressure plate he assumed was there. You can't expose me, Cora, Julian continued, his voice dangerously soft again. Victor is waiting with the car. Agent Kane has the city police tied up. Daltrey is in a cell, and no one will believe the hysterical bride who ruined her own wedding. The lake is very deep this time of year. He found the collection of poetry I had pulled out. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the spine, then quickly pulled the book. The bookshelf slid inward again, revealing the steel door and the 2 keyholes. Julian gasped, a small, triumphant sound. There it is, he breathed. He looked at the top keyhole, where the old key had just turned. He saw the faint scratch marks. You were here /. Where is the key, Cora? Give it to me now, and maybe I'll spare Victor from finding you. I backed away from the desk, moving toward the bay window overlooking the dock, the very place he killed my mother. The full truth needed to be revealed, not just to me, but to the audience, to Julian, and hopefully to someone who could use it. The evidence I had been gathering. I pulled Julian's phone from my pocket. It was still on. I quickly opened the voice recorder app and hit play. I had been recording since Victor shoved me down the service stairs. Every word, Julian's confession, his motive, his plan, it was all captured. Julian heard his own voice, distorted and echoing from the phone speaker. She was a complication /. She was going to call the authorities /. She was going to ruin everything I built /. Julian whirled around, eyes wide with shock and fury. The phone /. You little. I hurled the phone through the thick glass of the bay window. It landed with a loud smash on the dock outside. The recording continued to play, now amplified by the cold night air and the water. It's all on there, Julian. Your confession. Your whole plan. The transfer, Ironwood, Agent Kane, everything, I said, feeling an intoxicating blend of terror and triumph. And now the key. I pulled the key, the old, heavy key with the RN engraving, out of my corset. Julian lunged at me. I was too fast. I threw the key straight through the broken window, toward the deep water. Julian screamed in rage and frustration. He stopped pursuing me and rushed to the broken window, looking out into the darkness of the dock. The key was gone, submerged in Lake Serenity. He had my confession, but I had just destroyed the key that unlocked the evidence he needed, the ledger he still required to fully understand the scope of the Ironwood transactions. He turned back to me, his eyes blazing. You fool /. You just destroyed the one thing that could have saved you /. Now no one will ever find that ledger /. You're wrong, Julian, I said, bracing myself. Because I don't need that key anymore. I pointed to the safe room door, where the top keyhole was still clearly engaged. My father was a fixer, Julian. He knew how to hide things. And he knew how to leave breadcrumbs. This key, I said, pointing at the RN keyhole, was the first stage. It locks the door from the outside, preventing someone from simply stumbling upon the second key. But the second keyhole, that's for the key my mother had. The key you searched for after you killed her. Julian scoffed. And you expect me to believe you have that key? No, I smiled, and it felt like the first honest expression I'd worn all day. I don't. But I know who does. I know who was supposed to be the real executor of my parents' estate. The person who received my mother's final package before she went to the lake house. I was running a massive bluff. Julian needed to know the identity of the accomplice. He needed to know that someone else was coming. Julian's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Who? Who did she give it to? Victor? Lexi? Neither, I said, allowing myself to move toward the door leading out of the library. Someone you trusted. Someone who was so far outside your corporate world that you never even considered them a threat. The climax moment, the unexpected arrival. Before I could say the name, the silence in the house was ripped apart by the sound of a roaring engine outside. Not a car. Something much louder, much heavier. The sound of high-performance motorcycles. 3 massive figures, shrouded in leather and shadow, burst through the front door, scattering dust and splintering the frame. They were led by a man who was even larger than Stone Daltrey. The leader walked into the library, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. He was wearing the same leather cut as Stone, but his presence commanded an even darker authority. Julian froze, staring at the leader. His face was a picture of dawning, catastrophic realization. "Thorn," the leader rumbled. "You made a mess. You stole from a man who considered you a snake, but you put his daughter in harm's way, and you killed his wife. That was a bad decision." "The captain," Julian breathed, recognizing the name I had guessed earlier. The man wasn't the captain of anything nautical. He was the regional president of the Angels of Retribution Motorcycle Club. He was the one Stone had contacted from the secured office at the hotel. "My name is Jax Tellers, not the captain, but I know what you are looking for," Jax said, nodding toward the steel safe door. "The Ironwood Ledger. The one that proves you and your partner Vance were using Robert Nance's shell company to move millions for some very unhappy people in South America." Julian was trapped between me and the bikers. He saw the recording device on the dock through the broken glass. "Jax, listen to me," Julian pleaded, desperation making his voice crack. "Robert set me up /. He was going to expose me to your people /." Jax ignored him. He looked at me, a flash of genuine respect in his dark eyes. Robert Nance didn't trust lawyers or cops. He trusted family, and he trusted people who lived by a code, Jax said, nodding toward the safe. "Your mother gave the second key to the one person she knew Julian couldn't touch, the one person Julian would never suspect." Jax reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved silver key. It was the same size and shape as the old key I had thrown into the lake. The second key wasn't physical. It was code, Jax explained. The safe room required 2 keys, one to physically engage the lock, the RN key, and the second was a personalized thumb drive, disguised as a key, containing the final electronic bypass code and the digital ledger. He walked to the safe door, inserted the silver key/thumb drive into the lower lock, and turned it. A soft, electronic beep sounded, followed by a heavy clunk as the safe door unlocked. "Your mother's real executor," Jack stated, turning to Julian, "was Lexi Connors. Your best man's idiot wife. She was supposed to bring the lucky heirloom down the aisle. Lexi was naive, but she wasn't a killer. Your mother knew Lexi would be dismissed as a silly woman by you and Vance, so she was the perfect, invisible hiding place. I hadn't needed the key after all. Jax had the digital bypass. My mother had one more layer of protection, hidden behind the very people Julian was manipulating." Jax opened the safe door. Inside was a single item, a thick, leather-bound book. The original Ironwood Ledger. Julian made a desperate lunge for the safe. Jax's two associates reacted instantly, tackling Julian to the ground with brutal efficiency. Jax picked up the ledger, then turned back to me. The authorities, like Agent Kane, might be compromised, Cora. But the people Julian stole from. They are very, very interested in this ledger. Justice sometimes wears a badge, and sometimes it wears a patch. He looked toward the shattered window. And your recorded confession is about to be recovered. We found the cab driver, by the way. He's safe. And he has a very loud speakerphone. Julian's public humiliation was complete. His crimes were now exposed to a judge, a jury, and a criminal organization far more powerful and ruthless than Julian Thorne could ever imagine. The justice was being served publicly, loudly, and definitively. The ensuing chaos at the lake house was swift and decisive. Julian Thorne, battered and finally broken, was loaded into a separate, unmarked vehicle by Jax's crew. The Ironwood ledger, the key to his entire operation, was now in the hands of people who understood exactly how to use it to settle old debts. Jax, the imposing figure who had just saved my life, handed the leather-bound book to his associate, Tig Traeger, and then returned to the library. "That phone on the dock?" Jax asked me, his voice retaining its gravelly, no-nonsense tone. "It has his full confession." I smashed it against the window to keep the recording intact, but away from his hands. "Good work, Cora Nance," Jax said, nodding slowly. "Tig will recover the phone and ensure the audio file is duplicated and sent to the right federal contacts, the ones Julian didn't buy off. Agent Kane's corruption won't protect him forever." I finally allowed myself to lean against the desk, the adrenaline giving way to exhaustion and relief. What about Stone? Stone Daltrey. He was arrested because of Julian. Stone is a good man. An old friend of Robert's, like he said, Jax explained. He's family. The probation violation was a fabricated charge from Kane. Once the ledger and that recording hit the right desk, Stone will be released. He bought you the time you needed, Cora. He risked his freedom to keep that clock ticking. I realized the depth of the sacrifice Stone had made for a promise to my father. And Julian? Jax's eyes were cold. The people Julian stole from don't need a court case. They need accountability. Julian will face the consequences of messing with the Ironwood money, and he'll face them quickly. His reputation, his business, everything is gone. Thorne and Vance is finished. Victor Vance, your friendly best man, is likely already in custody. We had a meeting planned for him as well. The legal consequences were tied to the criminal consequences. The Shell Corporation was frozen, and the money Julian had drained from my inheritance, now exposed as dirty money, was seized by federal authorities. A slow process, but an inevitable one. I might not get the money back immediately, but Julian would never benefit from it. Justice served and relationships secured. A few days later, after the statements were taken and the immediate danger had passed, I sat down with Lexi. Lexi was traumatized, but also strangely transformed. She had been a truly naive woman, easily dismissed by the power players. He told me to bring the silver key as a good luck heirloom to the wedding, Lexi confessed, her voice thick with emotion. He said it was a family tradition I should start. I almost forgot it, Cora. Mom gave it to me right before she died, saying it was the most important thing I would ever own. Lexi had been my mother's final, perfect, hidden vault. Julian had known Lexi was simple enough to use as a courier without suspicion, but he never realized my mother had told Lexi nothing about its true purpose, ensuring Julian could never interrogate her for the secret. You saved my life, Lexi, I said genuinely. You were the last person Julian and Victor would suspect. Lexi was shaken, but the experience shattered her naivety, hardening her with a new sense of purpose and loyalty. Our friendship was now rooted in a shared, profound truth. My father's will was finally sorted. It turned out the lake house was, legally, still under a long-term commercial lease held by the original Nance Construction, a legal loophole my father had maintained for protection. The deed Julian was trying to finalize was only the transfer of the holding trust, which was now nullified. The lake house, and the small portion of my father's legitimate assets, were safe. Protagonist's triumph and final reflection. 6 months later, I returned to the lake house. It felt clean now, no longer haunted by my mother's death, but charged with her courage. The smashed window had been replaced. The ironwood ledger was now in federal evidence, but I had insisted on keeping a digital copy. I was using the information to rebuild. I discovered that Nance Construction, under my father's management, had done extensive, honest contracting work alongside the illicit transactions. I focused on the legitimate side. I restarted Nance Construction, rebranding it as Nance Legacy, dedicated to high-quality, honest regional development, the exact opposite of Julian's fraudulent schemes. I wasn't just building structures. I was building a foundation rooted in integrity. I was using the core skills my father taught me, the things Julian overlooked. My personal growth was complete. I was no longer defined by my grief or my need for rescue. I was the victor. And Stone Daltrey. He came back, free and clear. He didn't want the money I offered. I made a promise to Robert, Cora. "That's enough," he said, standing on the dock where I scattered my mother's favorite white flowers. But Stone didn't vanish entirely. He became the quiet, protective shadow of Nance Legacy. He managed the security of the construction sites, ensuring safety and efficiency. He wasn't my father, but he was exactly the strong, uncompromising figure my mother and father had chosen for me. He was my chosen family. We often sat on the porch, not talking much, just watching the lake. One afternoon, he finally opened up about his relationship with my father. "Your dad," Stone said, looking out at the water. "He saved my life 20 years ago when I was in trouble with the law. He gave me a way out, a chance to turn things around, as long as I promised to never touch the bad life again. That promise. That's why I was so scared to walk down that aisle. But seeing you, how strong you are, how much like your mother you became, it was worth every minute in that cell." I was financially secure, professionally successful, and surrounded by a small, fierce, protective chosen family. Julian Thorne and Victor Vance were facing years in federal prison, compounded by the pressure from the clients they had double-crossed using the Ironwood transactions. Their names were synonymous with disgrace, their dynasty crumbling to ash. I looked directly at the camera. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through the scariest day of my life. This story, from the whispers in the antechamber to the crash of glass on the dock, is a reminder that kindness is not weakness, and family is not always blood. Sometimes, the most decent people you meet are the ones society has judged. And sometimes, the monster you fear is wearing a bespoke suit. This journey taught me that we all have a well of strength inside us, and when betrayal strikes, we can either drown in it or use it to swim. If you felt that surge of relief, that final cathartic moment of justice, please hit the like button. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear that you can always come back from betrayal, no matter how deep the cut. Let me know in the comments, what was the moment you realized Julian was the killer? I'm working on another story now, about a woman who finds a strange map hidden in her grandmother's attic, and what she discovers changes everything she thought she knew about her family's past. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, trust your gut, and never underestimate the quiet ones. Thank you for watching.